All right, Alexander, let's talk about Russian Minister of Defense's warning to the collective West um, with regards to a missile strike against Russian territory, and that Russia will retaliate, and they will say that the U.S. and the U.K. are indeed a party to this war, to this conflict, if such a missile strike does occur. We have had Storm Shadow missiles, at least allegedly, these are Storm Shadow missiles, hit the bridge in Crimea that connects to Kherson. From what I understand, not much damage was done, no casualties, but obviously the collective West, obviously the UK and the US are going to be wanting to target Crimea and do some damage to infrastructure in Crimea or infrastructure in Russia, to be quite honest, even Moscow, because that's all they got. The Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. The Zelensky regime is talking about something happening to the nuclear power plant because that is all they have left. They've been badly beaten in this counteroffensive. They've gone nowhere. They have gone nowhere. They've lost so much men and weapons and resources, and they have gained absolutely nothing. I've seen the progress made. It's zero.
Yes,
Zero
I completely
progress.
agree. I completely agree.
So all they have left is, all they have left is a big strike, false flag, something. That's all they have left.
Absolutely. Now, I think this Shoigu warning is an extremely important event, actually, because the Russians have never been quite as explicit about this up to now, but about their warnings. But, we got to look at the events that are leading up to this. Firstly, there's an article that appeared some time ago in the Washington Post about the fact that, Biden is happy to cross Russian red lines. And that was the title. And, that he's going forward, he's crossing red lines. Then we had a comment from Biden, which many people, I think correctly, took to mean that he's now decided that he's going to supply ATACMS missiles to Ukraine. Now, ATACMS missiles are launched from HIMARS launchers. So when Shoigu talks about attacks on Russian territory from HIMARS launchers or Storm Shadows, I think he really means ATACMS missiles. That's my take. I understand that the launchers currently in Ukraine aren't able to launch ATACMS missiles, but you can always send more launchers which can. So I think that's what Shoigu was signalling. Then there was what the Russians continue to insist was Ukraine's sabotage of the Novaya Kakhovka Dam, which, from their point of view, was a big event, and they're saying it was carried out with missile strikes on the bridge, on the dam and the bridge, and again, that was a part of that. And as you correctly say, the Russians can also see the military situation. The Zaporozhye offensive is going absolutely nowhere. I read a report today. It was not a report, it was a comments by Putin. He says the 245 Ukrainian tanks have been destroyed. That's around 40% of Ukraine's tank fleet by some estimates. So, it's been a complete military debacle. So the Russians are becoming concerned, and they're saying to the US and to Britain, look, don't dare do this thing. You've crossed our red lines up to now, and we've shown incredible restraint, but don't count on that restraint continuing. Now, a few days ago, they attacked a decision-making center near Kiev. This is what the attack that took place when the African delegation was in Kiev. It was a bit mysterious, but it's now widely accepted that that was an operations room, one of these places with lots of computers and lots of screens, and you have officers there who assimilate all the intelligence that comes in from the various sources, American, British, whatever, drones, satellites, and give operational directions to the people on the front lines, and who actually guide HIMARS missiles and Storm Shadow missiles. They give the coordinates for the targets that these places are supposed to hit. And this operations room is apparently one of 3 in Ukraine. This is what I have been told by a knowledgeable source. Now, the point is that there are British and American officers in these operations rooms. So the Russians say, look, we did one, perhaps one where there weren't that many British and American officers. If you launch these attacks, we will respond immediately. And he actually Shoigu used the word immediately. We will strike at these 2 other operations rooms where your officers, British and American officers, are. British and American officers now are acceptable collateral damage. We will attack them. We will not be deterred from attacking them because we know that your people are there. And this comes shortly after Putin also made comments that if F-16s are delivered to Ukraine, but actually operate on the battlefields from bases in Poland and perhaps Romania, then the Russians will consider what steps to take against those particular bases, whether they need to take any steps, and if so, what those steps should be. So these are major Russian warnings. These are the Russians saying, look, we've shown great restraint up to this point. Don't count on it further. We understand you're getting desperate, but don't let your desperation make you reckless. Because if you do, then we're prepared to strike at your headquarters in Ukraine. And if you go further and you start sending aircraft from Poland or Romania to intervene, well, we might be prepared to go against those bases too. So this is a major warning from the Russians, and it was highlighted on the Russian Defense Ministry in its Telegram channel. It actually had these words of Shoigu in bold to make it absolutely clear that this is a warning not to be ignored. And I think that we should take, the Americans and the British should take this warning seriously. Now, this attack on the bridge, I think, hardly qualifies for this. It was one Storm Shadow missile. It did very little damage. This is a bridge between Crimea and Kherson region. I don't think I think the Russians can say this is just out, this is still within the conflict zone. But of course, if there are now attacks on Crimea itself with Storm Shadows and ATACMS missiles, then, as I said, the Russians have signalled that they will respond, and they will respond in a devastating way, and that Britons and Americans in Ukraine are targets.
It's incredible that we're a year and a half in this conflict. The collective West, the US and the UK, especially the UK, they've escalated a lot with Russia. They've continuously and consistently crossed red lines in their escalation with Russia, and their purpose, it's been stated, their purpose is to kill as many Russian soldiers as possible. I mean, they've said it. Lloyd Austin has said it. Many officials in the UK and the US have said it. It's amazing that we're at this point, and the Russians have restrained themselves from going after these command centers, which are in Ukraine, which are being used to fight the Russians, which are being used to go after the Russian military and also Russian infrastructure targets. But the Russians have held back from going after these centers. They know where they are, and they've probably known from day one where they are, but they haven't done anything. I mean, they've restrained themselves from actually going after the very decision-making centers that are being used to wage this conflict from the collective West, from NATO, against them. It's pretty incredible that's happened. And my final comment is that I don't think the point is the F-16s, Alexander. I don't think it. I think Russia knows they'll be able to handle the F-16s. They'll be able to shoot down the F-16s. I think everyone knows this. I think the point of the F-16s, in my opinion, is to specifically make sure that they take off from NATO territory in order to bait Russia into going after the airfields located in Eastern Europe. I think that's what the neocons really want. I think the neocons know that the F-16s aren't going to be a game changer. They know that the Russians will deal with the F-16s, but they want to make sure that those F-16s take off from airfields in Eastern Europe to go to Putin and say, well, what are you going to do about it now? We have F-16s taking off from Romania, and it looks like it's going to be Romania. We have them taking off from Romania. There's another red line. Are you going to hit Romania? I think the neocons want to get to that point.
I absolutely agree with that, and I think that is exactly what it's all about. And by the way, I mean, there was a really extraordinary article in CNN which they were saying that Ukrainian pilots were saying that they're being shot out of the skies by these far superior Russian fighter jets, and that's why they need F-16s. And in fact, the F-16s are of the same generation, at the same military period as the aircraft that the Ukrainians themselves are currently flying. And I mean, as I understand it, they are not capable of taking on these advanced Russian fighter jets. So you're absolutely right. I think that's exactly what it's all about. It's a case of baiting the Russians, trying to get the Russians to escalate in a kind of way that would provoke some kind of bigger Western response. And just the other day, it was yesterday, there was a British air marshal who was saying that what needs to happen is for NATO air forces themselves to be committed to the battle. And I'm sure that that's partly the agenda, so try to get Article 5 activated and all these sort of things. And you get the counter statements from people like Olaf Scholz. They're saying, he again said yesterday that NATO is going to support Ukraine in every way it can, but will do so in ways that are intended to avoid escalation, which I take as a sign that he is against these ideas of basing F-16s from Polish and Romanian territory and wants to avoid that sort of escalation. I think what the Russians are doing is, first of all, you're absolutely correct. They've showed incredible restraint in not attacking these decision-making centres. Now, I'm assuming that some kind of de facto deal was done fairly early on in the war. There was probably some kind of contacts between the US and the Russian military. The Russians said, look, we won't attack these places if you limit yourself and don't attack positions in Crimea with missiles. You know, if you send drones, the Ukrainians send drones across, well, that's not so concerning. But if you actually launch missiles against Crimea, that's a completely different game. The neocons are ignoring those kind of agreements. Agreements like that have been made previously in other conflicts. They were made in Vietnam, for example, during the Vietnam War. Soviet ships, merchant ships, used to go to Vietnam carrying Soviet weapons to help the Vietnamese fight the Americans. And the US didn't escalate by intercepting those ships on the high seas, which it could certainly have done, because they were presumably given warnings by the Russians that if they did do that, the Soviets would escalate in their own way. So those kind of understandings are not unknown or unique in war. But what is happening is that the Russians now think that the neocons, who are reckless people and increasingly desperate people, are now chafing to throw aside all these de facto agreements and to escalate and to goad people even further. So the Russians have now felt that the situation is so dangerous that they need to make a public warning. And of course it's addressed not so much to the neocons, but to the US military and to people like Olaf Scholz. Olaf Scholz says that he doesn't want an escalation. If he really doesn't want an escalation, he's not going to allow the F-16s to be based on Polish and Romanian bases. He could exercise a veto over that. Germany does have that kind of influence, but we shall see.
We're betting on Olaf Scholz. We're betting on the
I'm not
strength
suggesting.
and the resolve of Olaf Scholz. Oh boy, are we in trouble?
I know. I'm not saying that's the Russians are, but I mean that's the threat that they're making. And of course, it's Olaf Scholz, but it's also much more importantly, people in the U.S. Air Force, for example, General Brown, who's the incoming chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, taking over from Milley, who is himself an Air Force officer. He understands the risks very, very well. And the Russians are saying to him, look, there's all these crazy people on your side. They're coming up with all these crazy ideas. We do have our real red lines. Up to now, you've crossed what you say are our red lines, but these are our real red lines. If you cross them, you're in an escalation cycle which could very easily spiral out of control. Don't do it.
Okay, so they're going to do it.
Of course they are.
They're going to give the attack. They're going to give the ATACMS. They're going to give the F-16s, and most importantly, they're going to force Romania and Poland. I don't know if they're going to need to force Poland so much, but Romania and Poland are going to have those F-16s take off.
Well, indeed, and bear in mind
what happens then.
Bear in mind that a major place where the F-16 pilots are being trained is going to be apparently Romania, which strongly suggests that that's one of the places where the aircraft will be based, because it brings them closer to Crimea, which is what I think this is all about. So
and it brings Moldova into play as well. So Romania is a good spot for them to provoke conflict.
Exactly. So all of this is going to happen. Well, then it will be for the Russians to decide what they're going to do, whether they will launch their strikes against these aircraft in Romania, whether they'll simply content themselves with shooting them down, which they probably can do, by the way. But whatever, I mean, we can't predict too far ahead. We can't say definitely what's going to happen. But we're going to see a very, very difficult situation start to appear from about September, October, when these aircraft start to fly. At that point, this Ukrainian offensive will be out of the way. I mean, it doesn't look as if it's going to succeed. If it doesn't succeed, as I said, they'll be in a position. The next escalation will be, as I said, these attacks on Crimea with these aircraft, presumably flying from Romania. Whether people in Romania understand this or are aware of what's going on, and understand what their government appears to be involving Romania in, that's another matter.
That's the matter.
That is the matter.
People understand what's happening. Yeah. Okay. Anything else you want to add?
No, I mean this is the single most dangerous period in the whole war, because there was the hope that the Ukrainian offensive was going to break through to the Sea of Azov. Even Zelensky now, who's, by the way, finally admitted that there is an offensive actually going on. He's admitted it's not going as fast as he would like. And the Ukrainians are talking about heavy casualties. And in fact, they're at a standstill. So the offensive isn't going well. But the neocons, the group of people closest to Biden, the people whose views Biden himself viscerally shares. I mean, as we've discussed many times, these people have no reverse gear, and they will probably respond by wanting to escalate. And the Russians have said, if you escalate in that kind of way, don't think we're going to simply sit back and do nothing. This time, we are going to retaliate ourselves, and we will see that the escalation can that way run out of control. And by the way, Putin himself made a point I made before. He had that meeting with Russian war reporters a few days ago, about a week ago, And, they said to him, we've talked about red lines, NATO crosses them all the time, we don't respond. And he said, well, look, we have responded. I mean, we launched the special military operation precisely because they didn't respect our red lines. Now, I took that to be a signal, another signal from Putin. Don't test us. I mean, we've gone along with a lot of what you've done up to now because we have not wanted to escalate. But if you continue with this way, we've shown we can escalate before, and we will again.
Okay, we will end it there. The Duran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, ODYSEE, BitChute, and Telegram and Rockfin. And go to the Duran shop. 10% off. Use the code GOODDAY. Take care.